Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm sure people are still trickling in from the government's welcome, but I'm so excited to see you all here. Hello, welcome. My name is Allison Chu. I am the arts track leader for the Yale Innovation Summit. I'm a PhD candidate at Yale, and I'm also the artistic board president and co-founder of Midnight Oil Collective. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second year of the arts track here at the summit. The Yale Innovation Summit is an unprecedented opportunity for artists in particular. Coming into this session, you've already seen the crowds of entrepreneurs and investors and innovators walking through this hall, but the ability to bring artists into this space is something that deserves a bit of recognition. As many of you in this room know, the arts historically have not been included in conversations about innovation. But artists, with all of their creative energy, drive, and passion for constantly building towards something new, something that helps us see the world around us a little bit more clearly, absolutely need to be considered innovators. Here, literally right here in this room, is where it gets exciting. My co-track leader, Francis Pollock, and I, so Francis is in the other room leading another concurrent session, are not the only ones who believe this. We are so thankful that we get to work alongside cheerleaders and supporters and advocates for the arts throughout the Connecticut ecosystem, all who firmly share in this belief of empowering artists. I'm thinking of all of the great work that Liz Shapiro and her team at the Connecticut Office of the Arts has done at the state level, all the way to Adrienne Jefferson and her team here within the city of New Haven. Alongside the city office, we have an especially exciting community of artists and administrators, too many to list here, but many of whom are participating in the arts track over the next 2 days, and some representatives of that ecosystem are right here in this room. We'll dive deeper into discovering this creative ecosystem shortly, but I would be remiss to not mention the incredible support of the Yale Schwartzman Center under the leadership of Rachel Fine, as well as our hosts for the summit, Josh Jabal, Tim Opstrop, and Michelle McQueen of Yale Ventures, who have patiently and graciously given artists a platform to be acknowledged as true innovators. We'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge Caroline Prue and her venture I Heart Color. We selected Caroline's venture for an e-poster because we were excited by its innovative approach to an immersive theatrical experience. As the pitch deck described it, it's a venture that melds the Van Gogh immersive experience with the individual agency of Minecraft. Tragically, Caroline passed away a couple of weeks ago, a loss not just for this summit and her communities, but also for the arts industry more broadly, and we'd like to honor her here. We are inspired to keep Caroline's spirit of bringing the arts into dialogue with other industries throughout the summit. This year, the arts track is all about how we can foster continued innovation throughout the arts. With our thought partners from Creative Evolutions, and I believe some of them are here in the room. So Doug, over there, we've got Rebecca Novick in the back, and Kalita Jones, who will be our keynote speaker. We were driven to think imaginatively about the hurdles that currently stifle the arts. How can we challenge some of our ingrained beliefs about this field? What are the structures of this field that we are committed to, and which do we want to change? Are there new models we can adapt for our own communities that will ultimately uplift us all? Over the next 2 days, we have workshops, pitch showcases, competitions, and panels that will present so many big ideas, big, brilliant, and exciting ideas. And this is only the beginning. I look forward to meeting all of you, to hearing about what you're working on, and talking in the halls. With that, I want to turn it over to Emily Roller, my co-founder at Midnight Oil Collective, and also the co-founder of MakerState, an edtech platform geared toward entrepreneurship education for artists. Emily will be kicking us off on this creative ecosystem problem-solving workshop. Please help me welcome Emily.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. I really appreciate that. I'm so excited to see so many people here today. So the purpose of this particular workshop is to really take a look at the full creative ecosystem, sort of at a high level, and with an economic lens, or an economic and really a structural lens as well. And so we want to look at that ecosystem. Now that my slides are up. There we go. We want to think about what it is that we have to give to the ecosystem, as well as what we need from the ecosystem. And then we also want to talk a little bit about the challenges facing the ecosystem. And again, sort of doing this from a structural and economic lens for this particular workshop. You're going to have a ton of other panels and other ways to interact creatively and with other lenses throughout this conference. But for this one, the focus really is sort of on structure and sort of a higher level look at all of this. Just as a fair warning for fellow introverts in the room, I will be asking people to talk to each other a little bit. I won't make you rearrange seating at this point, but definitely note the people around you and sort of get used to the idea that in just a little bit, I will probably be asking you to say words to them. I know it just takes me a second to mentally prepare sometimes. So that's going to happen here in just a second. In fact, it's going to happen right now. So I want everybody to just take a moment. And part of the reason we do this is this room is full of so many interesting people. I'm looking around and I'm just always so happy to see the people who show up at the conference. And it's a brilliant room with brilliant and creative minds. And you don't always get to interact with people like this. So just to get started, I would love for everybody to take a moment with somebody nearby, or maybe 2 or 3 people. You can kind of cluster up a little bit. And just talk a little bit about when you think about an ecosystem, what are the entities that you think about being part of it? And then more importantly, do they have a shared goal? So is there a shared goal across all of the entities? So let me give you just a couple moments, turn and talk. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Feel free to step up. All right, let's take 1 more minute and wrap it up. This is good. Yeah. Let's stand on the side of the back. Okay, sounds good. All right, so let's start drawing the conversations to a close. Oh, thank you. This is a fast room. Ish. All right. So as we're thinking about what entities make up the creative ecosystem, is anybody comfortable calling out just a couple of entities that came to mind? Yeah.
I think we started big. So the first one we started with was the National Endowment for the Arts.
Okay.
Because virtually every nonprofit was started.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one. National Endowment for the Arts, absolutely. Any other major entities come to mind? Or smaller entities? Categories of entities, if that's easier? Artists. It's a pretty important one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, sorry, in the back, and then I'll get you next. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So the general public also included in that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah. So really focusing on local entities, which is good, and we'll kind of come back to that idea as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So any place that has space for artists to create, even if it's not specifically for that, can be part of the ecosystem. Definitely. Yeah, we came up with a list as well, and that's really along the same lines as what everybody's saying. We put them into categories just to make them a little bit easier to talk about at a high level, and also because a lot of the categories share similar challenges and interact, in similar patterns. They can be very different as well within each category, but in general, we came up with the government, right, including things like the National Endowment for the Arts, including the Department of Cultural and Tourism at a local level, the Office of the Arts at a state level, right? So we have the government. Nonprofits obviously are a bedrock of the arts in pretty much every community. And those can, of course, include festivals. They can include some venues. Some theaters are structured in a nonprofit way. There's education programs. There's lots of things in our field that are structured in this way. Educational institutions, really thinking about universities, colleges, other sorts of schools that really support arts programming, and then businesses, right? And I actually put the professional creators under the category of businesses because if they're trying to make their living from it, they are. And I think that's something that we are hopefully getting used to the idea of. And then, of course, there are also studios, there's agencies, there's commercial productions, there's distributors, there's Netflix, right? You could think at other levels, right? There's whole different levels to the for-profit businesses that really impact the ecosystem as a whole, right? And so all of these different things make up the ecosystem. And when we think about a shared goal, did anybody come up with a shared goal across these different entities? Because they can be very different, but we're saying they're all part of the arts. Anybody? Yeah, all of those are, I think, very, very common across these different things, and we can talk a little bit about that. But education, entertainment, and profit. Any other shared goals? Yeah. Impact. Yeah, absolutely. I tried to kind of combine a lot of those ideas into one sentence, which is sort of cheating when you're saying like one shared goal. But we came up with a thriving creative ecosystem sustains the creators of artistic content, supports the creation of artistic content, and connects this content with an audience that is positively impacted by it. And I don't know if that's the perfect, like, overarching shared goal, but it does feel like to me most of the different types of ecosystems that make this up do subscribe to at least one piece of this, right? And they're playing a part that's in there. So what I want us to do now is I want us to think about how these entities in the creative ecosystem are actually structured. And so we're going to take sort of a step back, and I'm going to speak a little bit generally. So some of these things may be not entirely true for the different entities that are represented in this room, or the ones that you've interacted with, but at a high level, just the way that a business is structured can have a large impact on sort of both the challenges it has and the advantages that it has. So the questions, when I'm talking about these things from a structural point of view, the things I'm really thinking about, the things that different entities, and this includes professional artists, right? So even when I'm saying an entity, if you're in here as a creator, think of yourself in this way. Start thinking about your work in this way, for at least for the purpose of this afternoon. But I hope also, in general, if you can walk away with something, starting to think about yourself in these terms as well. So there are end users, right? And when we say an end user, this is really adapting a tech term for this, but you're really thinking about who does this serve? If you're an artist, maybe you're thinking about who is your audience, right? Who are you really hoping is going to be interacting with your work? For customers, there's a distinction between an end user and a customer, right? Because the customer is who pays for it. And sometimes it's the same person, but a lot of times this can be different. In a lot of the accelerators that we've gone through, the very common example is Google, right? Because the users of like a Google search, they're not the ones who are paying for it, right? The advertisers are the ones paying for it. So the customers of Google are not actually all of us sitting in here. It's their advertisers, right? And this is a really important thing to start to distinguish between when you start to be like, oh, why is there tension here? Why am I, or what is the opportunity here if I'm trying to serve a group that may not have the means to interact with something? So this is a really important distinction to start thinking through. Then, of course, revenue sources, right, which is how something makes money. The decision makers, and for the purpose of this, thinking very high level, like who is it that's setting the priorities of a given entity? And then the implementers, right? Who are the people out there in the day-to-day making it happen? Again, sometimes there's overlap and sometimes there's not. Then there are, and then what we'll really focus on as I'm kind of going through this, hopefully I won't take too much time, so there's plenty of time for us to talk. But as I'm going through it, what I really will focus on are the sort of structural challenges that are common across these types of entities, and then also the strengths, right? Because there's challenges and there's strengths really to pretty much every different type of entity that's out there. So let's start with the government. It's really interesting in the 4 years since we founded Midnight Oil Collective, one of the things that we hear most commonly is, man, I wish the government would support the arts more. I wish there was more money, from the government allocated to the arts. And I do too, and everybody's like, oh, in Europe, or whatever. But I think that there are a lot of reasons why this doesn't happen. And I think it might be very hard for this to happen. And for this to be the, main hope for the arts to be the government is a difficult one, right? This is not to say don't advocate or anything like that. Please don't take that away. But this is to say that the structural challenge within our government, it has a little bit to do with the decision makers, right? Because they're shifting a lot. And every time somebody comes in, they have shifting priorities. Anybody who's worked in an arts office or really any position in the government, maybe there are teachers in here or something else. I know I have. Things get swapped out all the time, right? And just as you're making some traction, there's a different direction or amount of funding is cut or it's restructured in a new way, right? And so it can be very hard for the implementers to get a lot of momentum going. And there's also always a lot of competing priorities, right, that are totally outside of the arts, that can take funding, that can take time, that take resources. And so it's a little bit hard for this to consistently be a presence in the ecosystem. On the plus side, and anybody who's worked with, I would especially give shout outs to the Department of Culture and Tourism in New Haven and to Connecticut Office of the Arts. When you interact with the implementers of this, they do have such a strong knowledge of the field, maybe especially after having to continually shift priorities and get to know kind of everybody out there. And so even if there's not always funding, they're really good places to connect with, even with just the question. If the question you go with is not, can you give me money, but it is, who should I know and who's doing interesting things, then you're going to get some really interesting results from that conversation. So I would say that tends to be a bit of a strength, especially at a local level for our government arts institutions. Nonprofits. So nonprofits are a huge part of our ecosystem, right? And I know I'm going kind of fast through all this. We'll have a little time to digest. And if I'm going too fast, you can raise your hand and I can slow down. I tend to go a little bit fast sometimes in these things. But nonprofits, there's the challenge. I'm going to sort of jump straight to one of the big structural challenges with nonprofits, because we know that they're out there to do good, and we know that they're mission centered, and we know that if you've made the decision to start a nonprofit or to work in a nonprofit, you're doing it because there's a mission that you're very committed to, right? It's not to, necessarily make a lot of money. It's not to maximize shareholder value, right? It's actually very mission centered. But it can be really tough. And I think this is one of those places where it sometimes is useful to distinguish between the end users and the customers as we're talking about it. That's not the exact terminology that most nonprofits would use to talk about this. But when a decent part of your budget is from donors instead of from revenue sources generated from the end users themselves, sometimes there can be a little bit of tension there, right? Sometimes, I've worked in nonprofits, and there's a lot of times this sort of competing priority between pleasing donors versus, serving the end users in your mission if they're different people, right? Sometimes they're the same, but sometimes not so much. And sometimes really establishing some of these other revenue sources can be really important for a nonprofit to really be able to sustain itself, right? And we're at a period in the arts where we're seeing nonprofits really struggle right now. Not all of them, but it can be a really difficult model to make work, and that's part of the reason why. Obviously, the structural strengths being that this is usually a very mission-driven one, and the tax benefits. It's a strength to be able to take on money from donors sometimes, but it has to be thought of in a very intentional way, right? A board can also be an enormous strength if it's the right board, right? But these are all challenges and things that that should be considered as we're thinking about the ecosystem. Okay, so nonprofits. I'm still talking really fast, aren't I? Are we okay? Okay. All right. So universities, right? This was another type of stakeholder that we discussed. And universities, they are complex beasts. Even just to get the room set up and the tables like they are today, this afternoon, just to use a hot off the press example, was hard, right? Because it's under different jurisdictions and different, departments are in charge of the room configurations, right? Which is nothing necessarily against a university, but it does make them very hard to navigate. Anybody who's worked within a university understands that there are lots and lots of silos. And then, of course, you can have the university siloed off from everything outside the university, too, which is something that I think a lot of people have experienced as well. And so this tendency for this complex structure that has a lot going on, right? It's serving its students, but of course, like at a university like Yale, you've got, when you're thinking about the revenue, you've got endowments, you've got faculty commercializing their research, right? On the arts or on the science, not on the arts yet, but on the science side of things, right? You've got a hospital system that's being run out of this university, right? And so you've got a lot of things happening that can make it hard to navigate and hard to know where to go for support. If you're a creator, if you're a community partner, hard to know who to call if you're going to try to partner, right? One of the strengths of universities, though, that I really like about them is that a university's success is almost always, any of those things is almost always tied to a student's success or to its faculty's success, right? And so there is that really nice alignment between, at the end of the day, they do need their students to succeed, and they do need their faculty to succeed for it to sort of, any of these revenue streams to be viable. So it's aligned in that way. It's just can be very difficult, again, almost like the government. Lots of priorities, lots of different silos, it can be hard. So, universities. And then I'm dividing businesses into two categories. And this may be a little bit of a new distinction. It's something that has grown out of my work with a collaborator from MIT. And it uses sort of their entrepreneurial framework, right? And they make the distinction between this category, a small, medium creative enterprise or a small, medium enterprise, and an innovation-driven enterprise, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. And a reason to do this is to really understand sort of two different approaches, right? Because we do know that there's obviously different business models for somebody who's doing a small business, and what you're thinking about, or if you're an artist and you're making something and you're selling it, at anywhere, really, right? At fairs, or if you're writing scripts and you're trying to sell them off, right? You're sort of your own small business, and in a second, I'll sort of, you'll have the other half of this, and this might make a little bit more sense. But when you're a small business, it can be a one-person thing. It can have multiple people. Medium enterprises can have a lot of people, but it's usually geared toward a more local audience or a more local market, and it's typically selling a good or a service to this area. And there's a lot of pressure to continue to sell, right? Like, you're only going to have money coming in if you have something to sell pretty consistently. And they're often very founder dependent as well, which puts a lot of pressure on it, right? And anybody in here who's done the hustle knows what I'm talking about, most likely, if you've tried to sell your works in this way. A nice thing about it is it doesn't usually cost a lot of money to start up. You might need a little money for resources, but you can get going pretty quickly. The founder usually maintains a lot of control and creative control, which is very appealing for most of us as artists. And it really does a lot for the local economy, right? There's ways, like, these small businesses are really important parts of any creative ecosystem. And so there have to be ways to help support these, right? So that's one type of business. And I want to like compare that or contrast it a little bit with what's called an innovation-driven enterprise. And an innovation-driven enterprise is a little different from a small business in that it's not about selling, right? And so think about the development of a musical, for instance. If you retain ownership over the intellectual property as an artist that you're developing as a musical, and you can get it through the development process so that it has a run on Broadway, then you're actually making a lot of money, right? And you're not having to continuously sell necessarily, right? I'm doing this because this is like a J curve. It's like the curve of the chart that you show on this thing. Because what's really interesting about an innovation-driven enterprise is there's almost always an investment period, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it requires funding, but usually there's like some sort of funding or investment that has to go in where you're losing money or you're spending money to make a thing happen. So you can think about a musical, you're spending money to have a reading, you're spending money to continue to like make it go forward, right? But then there's a period where you find that really good fit. And then once you do, it goes up very, very sharply, right? And that can be true for lots of different things. It happens with film. It can happen with television shows. If you can maintain ownership of that, and if you can learn how to drive that process forward, even more so. But this is another important type of entity that exists out there, because this is also, some of these larger entities, Disney or something like that is going to really trade in these innovation-driven like pieces of content, right? And they're going to own it. But if there are ways to do this independently as well. So anyway, that's another type of entity that exists. So I want to, now that I've kind of thrown a whole bunch of material at you, I want you to think a little bit about the different role that you play in whatever your particular role is in the creative ecosystem. And even if you're like, oh, I'm not really part of it as an official entity, almost everybody here consumes art in one way or another, right? And again, that general audience, on every single slide, there was something about an end user and there was something about a customer, right? And so you're still most likely part of the creative ecosystem in one way or another. And so I want you to think about what role or roles do you play in the ecosystem, and then really think about it in these terms. What do you have to give to the ecosystem, and what is it that you need from the ecosystem? And again, if we could just take maybe 5 minutes or so to kind of turn to somebody nearby and talk a little bit. One more time, it's about what do you have to give to the ecosystem, and what is it that you need, as well as who are you? Okay, so take 5.
Why would I need yeah. So I can
All right, let's take another minute and wrap it up. All right, so if we could kind of bring it back together here, that would be great. Thank you. Excellent. Um, fantastic. Is anybody willing to share a little bit about who you are in the ecosystem? And feel free to share too, if first of all, if you have any questions about what I just went through. I know I went through it pretty fast. So feel free to ask that, or if any part of it resonated with you as well in terms of the way that we talked about the entities and the challenges. So if anybody's willing to say who you are in the ecosystem, and then what you have to give and what it is that you need from it. That would be great. Yeah, here, I'll let you out.
Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I'm mostly a end user, sometimes a customer. I was asked if I'm an artist. I say I'm a creator. So I'm a podcaster and a writer. I'm a crafter. So I don't think of myself as an artist. I'm a crafty person. And I started having like a monthly crafting group with friends because we want a place to go to create. And I happen to have a space. But something else that came up in our conversation that we would love to have more conversations about is that there's this overarching assumption that you cannot make money as an artist, and it's bullshit. And so we need to start having more conversations like that. So I think that's what this ecosystem needs, is places to have that conversation and then teach people first of all, how do I get rid of that mindset? And then how do I make money?
That's fantastic. You're actually very much anticipating my next slide. So it would be a great time to move forward, but oh, excellent. Yeah. Anybody else want to share a little bit about who you are in the ecosystem, what you have to give, what you need? Yeah, Allison, can you? Oh. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynn Harris, and I just realized I'm not sure I'm like between the two columns on the left, which I'll explain. My company is called Gold Comedy, and we're a comedy school and a professional network and content studio that prioritizes women and non-binary folks and others. So I myself think of myself as an artist and creator, but my role in the company is like an enabler, like a multiplier to sort of stand there and do stuff so other people can do their thing. So that was the first question, right? Mm-hmm. What do we need?
What would you need from the ecosystem?
Money. Yeah. We've done everything we can with elbow grease, and part of the reason that we love this forum is just what you were saying, that we are actually a totally investable in company, and the hurdle is explaining that to investors who don't think of arts that way, which is, of course, why most of us are here.
Yeah, fantastic. And so I actually hear two things in that, because money is the primary thing, but then also that ability to sort of translate this to investors, right? And support in doing that, and spaces to do that as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, here, I might be closer.
Just because it ties in really well. I would see myself as an amplifier of artists. I'm an impact producer. So I walk beside typically creative teams to broker investors, brands, opportunities. So actually it is a money conversation, but it's a value conversation. So I think the sooner we make that flip, the better this conversation's going to get.
All right, anybody else wanting to share? Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Pamela Reiter-Feenstra, and I'm the Artistic Director of Healing Bells. We partner with trauma survivors to transform their stories of trauma into healing power through the arts. And I support the team and build community within that, and also get to observe the healing process take place. Our challenges are funding, but we are giving value. We're talking about the social innovations, the health innovations, and we also are trying to break into the health and neuroscience and immunotherapy fields, because trauma affects all of those aspects. And I had someone today say to me, "You're really serious about research for an artist." And just to be able to break into those cross-disciplinary arenas that also can help the funding flow and bring our research to a wider audience and impact as well.
Thank you so much. I love that because you're also saying that this creative ecosystem doesn't have to just be about things that, you know, have arts in the title, right? And that like opening our minds up to other partnerships outside of this and not siloing ourselves off is also a really important thing to do at the ecosystem level. Yeah. Yeah, doing it.
Choose my mic. Hi, I'm Greg from Quinnipiac University, but this is not related to my institution. I have two questions. First is, what role do maker spaces play within the ecosystem that you've been working with or that you envision? And the second is, what is, after the collapse of FTX and Binance, et cetera, the role of NFTs, if at all, and we can be cognizant that people sold a work for $69 million. So that in some ways becomes, quote, the Bitcoin standard for making money in the arts. So kind of grassroots access to spaces to make, and then really big time funding.
Yeah, thank you so much for those. Is anybody in here involved with a makerspace of some sort? Just so that if there is an expert in the room, yeah. Do you want to speak a little bit to how those have impacted you? Yeah.
So, I'm still in middle school, so I don't have that much of a role in a creative ecosystem, but my school has been incorporating maker spaces into our STEM program. So since we are in pre-K 4 to middle school, we get to work in a makerspace as one of our elective classes. And they also give you an option to work in related programs after school. Yes, I found it very valuable because it helped me with a lot of my projects and where I wanted to go for future years.
Okay, Hudson Montessori in New Jersey. Yeah, and I think. Oh, did you have something to add?
I was going to add that the New Haven. So it's not like a fully access to.
Yeah, and my sense of most makerspaces is that they're very mission oriented and often set up through educational institutions and nonprofits. But that, yeah, I mean, they're really valuable for providing that space. A lot of times, those are. That's one of the primary barriers and one that can be solved through that. As far as NFTs going, then you're getting into sort of the conversation that's like that distinction between small, medium enterprises and innovation-driven enterprises. And what's kind of exciting about NFTs is they do provide an opportunity to potentially think a little outside the box and start to think about things that could bring larger amounts of profit to artists. And so I think it's one of those tools that can be explored, but has to be incorporated into a business model in a really thoughtful way. So I wouldn't say it's like the answer. It's just like NFTs, AI. These words get a lot of buzz, but however you use them, it has to be done still within a well thought out business model. Okay, so I'm going to move on before I had lots of time, and now I've probably taken too much time. Okay, no, we're okay. All right, so to the final sort of segment of this. So we talked earlier about a shared goal, right? And kind of returning back to this idea, if an ecosystem's goal is to sustain creators, to support the creation of new art, and to connect it with an audience, we're not doing the greatest job right now across the board, right? We know that the creative ecosystem is struggling a little bit. I kind of think about it as being just really out of balance, right? Because you do have creators who are struggling, working super, super hard, struggling to get by, right? So you have nonprofits, very mission-centered, having a really hard time consistently having the revenue that they want to support their activities. You have commercial enterprises, right? You're watching all of these mergers that are happening with streamers. You're watching things at a really high level, also struggling to find a business model at this particular juncture, right? That's actually sustainable and that's actually working for their different priorities. And it's interesting because all of this is happening at a time when people are consuming more content than ever, right? And when this is still like $1 trillion market, where the saying, definitely the saying in the musical theater world, but I think it applies across the arts, is that you can't make a living, but you can make a killing. What that tells me is that things are out of balance, right? And things are getting pulled up in certain areas and they're not available in others. And so what we do have, which may scare a lot of artists sometimes, I think is a little bit of a math problem, right? And how do we start to address sort of the reality that we're facing right now? And I think that one of the biggest things that we have to start with is our mindsets. Everybody in the creative ecosystem has to take a little moment and examine how they think, especially when it comes to the economics of their field. What are the mindsets that kind of keep starving artists starving, right? And I've listed several up here that we've encountered. Obviously, we have the very first one, that the arts don't or can't or shouldn't. I've heard all three variations of those make money. There are ones that there's only sort of two models. You either have to be in sort of this patronage model where you're reliant on somebody wealthy to keep your thing going, or you have to sell out to, Disney or whatever, and that those are sort of the only things that are really out there and the only ways that it can really work. That making money somehow cheapens art. That's something that we've heard a lot of. That business and art are at odds, that they don't really mesh. Yet another sort of, I think, a mentality that comes maybe from just not exploring how creative business can really be, and how much a creative mindset can really take the tools offered and the structures offered and be like, well, but we could do this and this and this, and suddenly you have a whole different thing, right? A whole different balance. That the government or somebody else, or an agent, a lot of times I've heard, or a producer is going to kind of swoop in, and that they're gonna bail the artist out, or they're going to bail the arts out, or they're going to be the thing that solves a problem. Or that audiences, that you can't really change their mind, and that they're just going to keep consuming the things that they've always consumed, and that they're not open to new and creative ideas or approaches or experiences. And I think all of these are mindsets that create some challenges within our field, right? And so for the final little talk session with folks around you, is I want you to think of one of these, or you can talk about multiple ones throughout your conversation. I won't be, be creative, but select a challenge, and then think about, with the people around you who you've just met, what's a way that you could partner with somebody, right? Just sort of as like a thought exercise. How might you be able to partner with somebody to address one of these challenges? And especially thinking like, can you collaborate or experiment or in some other way activate some part of the ecosystem? And what would each party get and be able to provide to that partnership? I know those are kind of lofty ambitions for a single thing, but I think that's what these spaces are so exciting about, is that it can spark these types of conversations. So yeah, let's take we've got 10 minutes left in the session, so let's take about 8 of them to actually kind of get into depth into this conversation, okay? All right. Let's go ahead and bring it back for a moment. Hopefully we'll have a lot of time to continue this afterwards. There'll be a lot of time to chat. But I like it. It's not happening. All right. So I'm interested to know, and I love actually how much the conversation just is continuing because that's exactly what should be happening right now. And after this, there's like 15 minutes. I think they'll try to set up for the next thing, but everybody will be able to continue this conversation further. So I'm so excited to see it happening. Did anybody find a partnership in here, in the room? I'm just curious. Yeah? You want to shout out a little bit about it? Or no, you don't have to.
My name is Andrew, and and I'm here developing this. The heart of the whole series is I personally felt really great training. Educating.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you. Awesome. I think we're running out of time, so hopefully everybody will have a chance to connect and continue to connect afterwards. Oh, there's an excited hand in the back.
Is it okay if I pitch the next?
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Hi everyone. So we back here are the facilitating the next workshop in here, which is called Via Live. It'll be a chance to have a participatory experience of how to add some daily creative practices to your life, whether or not you consider yourself an artist. So I hope you'll stay and engage in that with us.
Cool. Yeah, and Allison, did you want to kind of come and close us and tell a little bit more too? Because I think a lot of these topics are going to come up in other panels as well. So
Thank you, Emily. This has been wonderful to see everyone just starting the conversations, kicking this whole Summit Arts track off. I'm delighted to see all the conversations happen. Please come find us and talk to us about the things you're discovering, what you're working on. We'd love to hear about this. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is all of the conversations that have been starting are actually going to be some of the themes of our panels for tomorrow. So we have one titled Challenging Economic Assumptions in the Arts, which I think actually Emily will be one of the panelists. We also have another one with Claire leading in the back there, who is moderating a panel on how to create creating the conditions for an innovative space. How can we make sure that we're constantly thinking about setting the conditions right to be innovating, to be thinking about how we can change our field. So I look forward to seeing you all at the sessions later today and for tomorrow. And thank you all so much.